My name is Adrian. You might be wondering why I'm telling you my story, and honestly, I've asked myself that same question 100 times over the past few months. But if there's one thing I've learned in this mess of a life, it's that silence doesn't fix anything. So here we are. I used to work for one of those big, shiny corporations, the kind with glass skyscrapers and boardrooms that look like they belong on the cover of some business magazine. The name doesn't matter. Trust me, you'd recognize it. It was a place where people wore expensive suits but couldn't tell you what their job actually entailed beyond vague buzzwords like synergy and innovation. I started there fresh out of college, bright-eyed and full of hope. I believed in the mission, or at least I wanted to believe in it. For years, I climbed the ladder, working late nights, skipping vacations, and sacrificing weekends. My friends joked that I was married to my laptop, and maybe they weren't wrong. I poured everything into that company because I thought it would pay off, not just financially, but emotionally. I wanted to make an impact, to leave something behind that mattered. And for a while, I thought I had done exactly that. Then came the deal. It wasn't supposed to be mine. At first, it belonged to someone else entirely, a senior VP who treated it like his personal golden ticket. He'd been trying to close it for months, but every time he got close, something fell through. When he finally threw up his hands and declared it impossible, our CEO turned to me. "Adrian," she said, leaning back in her leather chair like she owned the world, which, let's face it, she pretty much did. "Can you handle this?" I didn't hesitate. Of course I could handle it. That's who I was, the problem solver, the person everyone called when things went sideways. So I dove in headfirst, spending weeks poring over spreadsheets, analyzing market trends, and flying across the globe to meet with stakeholders. I negotiated terms so aggressively that even I was surprised by how far I pushed them. And then, after months of relentless effort, it happened. We closed the deal. $2.2 billion. That's how much money that deal brought into the company. $2.2 billion. Do you know what that feels like? To sit in a room full of executives as they toast your name, clinking glasses filled with champagne imported from France? To hear your CEO call you a game changer during an all-hands meeting? For about 2 seconds, it felt incredible, like I'd finally arrived, like all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. But here's the thing about corporate America. Success isn't always rewarded. Sometimes it's punished. It started subtly the way these things often do. A missed promotion, a project reassigned to someone else without explanation, comments in meetings that seemed harmless enough but carried a sting underneath. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was being too sensitive. After all, I'd just pulled off the biggest deal in the company's history. Surely, they wouldn't turn on me now. But then came the layoffs. Hundreds of employees were let go, including some of my closest colleagues. People who had worked harder than anyone deserved. People who trusted the company to take care of them. And yet, somehow I stayed. Not only did I keep my job, but I was given more responsibilities, more targets, more pressure. It was like they were testing me, seeing how much I could endure before breaking. And then one Friday afternoon it happened. I was called into the CEO's office, her actual office, not some conference room, and told to have a seat. She didn't offer me coffee or small talk. Instead, she slid a piece of paper across her desk. It was a severance agreement. "You're fired," she said bluntly, her voice devoid of emotion. No preamble, no explanation, just those 3 words that hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, dumbfounded. What? I managed to choke out, "Why?" She shrugged, as if firing someone who had single-handedly made her billions was no big deal. "Restructuring," she said simply. "We need to streamline operations." Streamline operations. That's corporate speak for "we don't need you anymore." But deep down, I knew it wasn't about restructuring. This wasn't about efficiency or cutting costs. This was about power, about control. They didn't want someone like me around, someone who had proven herself capable of doing the impossible, someone who might one day demand more than they were willing to give. The days that followed were a blur. I wandered through my apartment like a ghost, replaying the conversation in my head over and over again. How could they do this? Didn't loyalty mean anything anymore? Didn't hard work count for something? But anger eventually gave way to something else. Clarity. As I sat alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me. This was bigger than me. This was about a system that chewed people up and spit them out without a second thought. A system that valued profit over people. A system that needed to change. And so I decided to take it down. Now, before you start picturing me as some kind of corporate vigilante, let me clarify. I'm not talking about blowing up buildings or hacking into servers, though, admittedly, the idea crossed my mind. No, what I had in mind was far more calculated, far more dangerous, because dismantling a system isn't about destruction, it's about exposure. It's about shining a light on the cracks until the whole foundation crumbles. I began by gathering information. Years of working in that company had given me access to files, emails, and documents that most people never saw. Things that painted a very different picture of the organization than the polished image they presented to the public. I started small, reaching out to former colleagues who had also been burned by the system. Some were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation, but others were eager to help, hungry for justice. Together, we pieced together a narrative, a story that exposed the truth about how the company operated, about the deals made under the table, the corners cut, the lives ruined in pursuit of profit. We compiled evidence, cross-referenced data, and built a case so strong it could bring the entire empire crashing down. But exposing the truth isn't easy. Every step forward felt like 10 steps back. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that I was fighting a losing battle, that the system was too powerful, too entrenched to ever truly change. And maybe it was. But even if I failed, I knew I had to try. Because staying silent wasn't an option anymore. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself changing. The anger that had fueled me at first began to soften, replaced by something deeper, something quieter. Purpose. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about creating a better future. For myself, for others, for anyone who had ever felt powerless against a machine. And now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel the weight of what's to come pressing down on me. The next move is mine to make, and once I do, there will be no turning back. The system has already begun to notice. Whispers of betrayal echo through the halls of the company I once called home. They're looking for me, hunting for the source of the leak. But I'm ready. Whatever happens next, I'll face it head-on. Because this isn't just my fight anymore. It's ours. The first time I realized they were onto me, it was subtle. Too subtle, really, for anyone else to notice. But I've spent years learning how to read between the lines. An email flagged as urgent that wasn't urgent at all. A meeting rescheduled without explanation. Colleagues who used to greet me with warm smiles, now avoiding eye contact altogether. The signs were there if you knew where to look. But instead of panicking, I found myself smiling. If they were watching me, it meant I was getting close. Close enough to rattle them. Close enough to make them sweat. And honestly, that felt good. For months, I'd been living in their shadow, playing by their rules, letting them dictate the terms of my life. Now, finally, I was calling the shots. Still, I couldn't afford to get cocky. They had resources I could only dream of. Teams of lawyers, private investigators, PR firms ready to spin any narrative they wanted. One misstep, and everything I'd worked for would crumble. So I stayed cautious, methodical. Every move I made was calculated. Every decision weighed against the potential consequences. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. That's when I reached out to Marcus. He wasn't someone I'd ever imagined collaborating with. Not because we didn't get along, but because he represented everything I thought I hated about corporate culture. Marcus was a numbers guy, the kind of person who lived and breathed spreadsheets. Where I saw people, he saw data points. Where I saw emotion, he saw algorithms. But he also had something I desperately needed. Access. We met at a coffee shop downtown, tucked away in a corner booth far from prying eyes. Marcus slid into the seat across from me, his usual crisp suit replaced by jeans and a hoodie. It was strange seeing him out of his element, almost like spotting a wild animal wandering into civilization. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. His fingers drummed nervously on the table, betraying the calm exterior he tried so hard to maintain. "No," I admitted, stirring sugar into my coffee. "But does it matter?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Adrian, I'm not saying I don't believe you. What you're doing, it's brave. Hell, it's probably necessary. But these people, they don't mess around. You expose them, and they'll come after you with everything they've got." "I know," I took a sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness linger on my tongue. But what's the alternative? Let them keep lying? Keep cheating? Keep destroying lives while they sit in their ivory towers counting their billions? Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made me shift uncomfortably in my seat. Finally, he nodded. Okay, what do you need? It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but it was enough. Over the next few weeks, Marcus became my lifeline. He smuggled documents out of the company under the guise of routine audits, feeding me information that confirmed what I'd long suspected. The corruption ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. Shell companies laundering money, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, executives padding their bonuses while cutting employee benefits. It was worse than I'd thought and better than I'd hoped. With each new piece of evidence, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about me or even the handful of colleagues who had joined my crusade. This was about exposing a system that thrived on exploitation, greed, and deceit. A system that needed to be dismantled before it consumed anyone else. But gathering evidence was only half the battle. The real challenge lay in figuring out how to release it without getting caught or killed. Leaking documents to the press seemed like the obvious choice. But experience had taught me that journalists weren't always trustworthy. Too many stories had been buried or twisted beyond recognition once they landed in the wrong hands. No, if I wanted this to work, I needed to take control of the narrative myself. That's when I stumbled upon the idea of creating a website, a digital archive where anyone could access the truth. Simple, straightforward, impossible to ignore. Of course, building such a platform required skills I didn't possess, which led me to Elena. Elena was different. She worked freelance, taking on odd jobs for whoever paid her well enough. Her specialty? Cybersecurity, or, as she liked to call it, making sure no one screws you over online. When I approached her with my plan, she raised an eyebrow but didn't ask too many questions. Smart woman. Asking questions tended to lead to answers you didn't want to hear. All right, she said, leaning forward in her chair. Her laptop sat open on the table between us, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light of her apartment. Let's say I help you build this thing. How do you plan to protect yourself once it goes live? Because, trust me, they'll come after you faster than you can blink. I hesitated. Truthfully, I hadn't thought that far ahead. All my energy had been focused on gathering evidence and planning the rollout. Staying safe hadn't crossed my mind, at least not in practical terms. Elena must have seen the uncertainty flicker across my face because she sighed and shook her head. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, she muttered. Then with a shrug she added, guess it doesn't matter. You're paying me either way. For the next several days, Elena worked tirelessly, teaching me how to mask my IP address, encrypt files, and set up decoy servers to throw off anyone trying to trace the site back to me. She even helped me create burner phones and email accounts, ensuring that every communication remained untraceable. By the time she finished, I felt like Jason Bourne, if Jason Bourne had a crippling caffeine addiction and zero combat training. As launch day approached, the weight of what I was about to do began to sink in. Once the site went live, there would be no turning back. The company would retaliate, of course, they always did. Lawsuits, smear campaigns, maybe even threats. I'd prepared for all of it, but preparation didn't make the fear disappear. Fear has a way of lingering, whispering doubts in your ear when you least expect it. The night before the launch, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the stack of files spread out across my kitchen table. Each document represented hours of painstaking effort, countless late nights spent piecing together fragments of the truth. Together, they formed a mosaic of corruption so vast it almost defied comprehension. And yet, as I flipped through the pages, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something crucial. It wasn't until I reached the final file, a transcript of a boardroom meeting I'd secretly recorded months earlier, that hit me. The smoking gun. The one piece of evidence that tied everything together. In the recording, the CEO herself admitted to knowingly violating regulations in pursuit of profit. Not just bending the rules, but breaking them outright. She laughed about it, actually laughed, as though the law were nothing more than a minor inconvenience to be brushed aside whenever it suited her. Listening to her voice sent chills down my spine. This wasn't just greed, it was arrogance. A belief that she was untouchable, invincible. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. With this recording, I wouldn't just expose the company. I'd destroy it. Completely. Utterly. Irrevocably. But as tempting as it was to upload the audio immediately, I forced myself to pause. Rushing and blindly would only give them ammunition to discredit me. No, this had to be done carefully. Strategically. Timing was everything. So I waited, watched, planned, and when the moment finally arrived, I struck with precision, releasing the evidence in waves designed to overwhelm and destabilize. Within hours, the internet exploded. News outlets picked up the story, social media lit up with outrage, and employees, past and present, began sharing their own experiences, adding fuel to the fire. At first, the company tried to deny everything. Their PR team issued statements dismissing the allegations as baseless accusations and accusing me of fabricating evidence. But the truth has a way of cutting through lies, and soon cracks began to form. Executives resigned. Stock prices plummeted. Investigations were launched. Through it all, I stayed hidden, watching from the shadows as the empire I'd once served crumbled before my eyes. Part of me felt guilty, not for exposing the truth, but for the collateral damage left in its wake. Lives disrupted, careers ruined, families torn apart. But another part of me knew it was necessary. Sometimes destruction is the only path to renewal. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can't help but wonder what comes next. The fight isn't over, not yet. There will be consequences, both personal and professional. But for the first time in years, I feel free. Free from the weight of silence. Free from the chains of complicity. Free to imagine a future where power isn't wielded recklessly, where people matter more than profits. Whatever happens, I'm ready. In the end, justice prevailed. The company was dismantled. Its leaders held accountable for their actions. Whistleblower protections were strengthened, and former employees found new opportunities in a fairer, more transparent industry. Adrienne, though forever changed by her journey, finally allowed herself to heal. She moved to a quiet coastal town where she started mentoring young professionals, teaching them how to navigate the corporate world without losing themselves in it. Surrounded by friends who stood by her and a community that embraced her courage, Adrienne discovered something she hadn't felt in years: peace. And as she watched the sunset over the ocean one evening, she realized that sometimes taking down a system isn't just about destruction. It's about building something better from the ashes.